Imagine Russia in the beginning of the 20th century. Winter, snow is falling. An elderly man sits at the steps of an institute, the very institute he had created. He stops people, looks them in the eyes, and asks quietly, "Do you still remember me?" But they don't answer. They walk past him as if he has nothing to do with this place. It's hard to believe that just a few years earlier, this man was not simply known. He was one of the central figures in an emerging science. His lectures drew packed auditoriums. His ideas shaped an entire generation of scholars. And the building behind him, in the very heart of Moscow, stood as a symbol of a new kind of knowledge. This man founded the first psychological institute in Russia. And in many ways, he did for his country what Wilhelm Wundt had done for the world, helped turn psychology into an independent discipline. Yet, in a matter of years, he was removed from his position, forbidden to lecture, prohibited from publishing, and left without any means of livelihood. This is the story of Georgy Chelpanov, the man who built a discipline and lived long enough to see it turn away from him. But before we find out how it happened, we need to go back to the time when psychology didn't yet exist as an independent science. Georgy Ivanovich Chelpanov was born in 1862 in Mariupol, a southern port city of the Russian Empire. Situated on the coast of the Sea of Azov, it was a true melting pot where different cultures and traditions intersected. Chelpanov came from a family of Azov Greeks who belonged to the urban middle class. As far as is known, he was the youngest of 6 children. In his family, education was taken very seriously, and from an early age, Chelpanov showed a strong love for learning and eventually graduated from the gymnasium with a gold medal. At first glance, nothing seems extraordinary in this background, and yet this is exactly where the story begins. After that, Chelpanov moved to Odessa and enrolled at Novorossiysk University, one of the most open and intellectually dynamic universities of that time. He was initially drawn towards humanities, particularly philosophy. But then something unexpected happened, something that would drastically change the trajectory of his life. Imagine a full lecture hall. A young Chelpanov sits among the students, listening to a lecture which feels nothing like the others. In front of him is not just a professor. It is head of the Department of Philosophy, Nikolai Grot. Despite being a well-known professor, he doesn't maintain an academic distance. He doesn't read from notes, he speaks as if thinking in real time. He can begin with one idea and shift to another simply because a student in the room has shown interest. He asks questions, and he does something almost unthinkable for the universities of that time. He invites students to think with him. It is Grot who begins to speak about an emerging science of the human mind. It is Grot who introduces Chelpanov to Wilhelm Wundt and his experimental methods. And in that moment, something decisive happens. Not just curiosity, not just academic interest, but a genuine, enduring passion for psychology is ignited, the one that Georgy Ivanovich would carry throughout his entire life. Soon after this, the young and promising student met Olga Ivashenko, a gifted and well-educated woman. They fell in love and were married in the Church of Saint Mary Magdalene in Mariupol. Olga became an indispensable support to her talented and energetic husband. She was closely involved in his professional life and assisted him with writing and editing articles, translating from German and French, preparing manuscripts for publication, and working with drafts. Although their life was marked by frequent separations, largely due to Chelpanov's professional commitments, surviving letters testify to a deeply trusting and caring relationship between them, which lasted for almost 2 decades. A few years later, Chelpanov fulfills a long-held dream. He travels to Germany. There, Georgy Ivanovich meets Wilhelm Wundt in person and spends some time training in his laboratory in Leipzig. And what he encounters is unlike anything he has seen before. Here, the mind is not discussed in abstract terms, it is measured. Instruments line the tables, reaction times are recorded with precision, attention is tested. This is a different language of science. And for Chelpanov, this is not simply academic experience, this is a turning point. For the rest of his life, he would say that he had two teachers, Nikolai Grot and Wilhelm Wundt. Grot gave him philosophical depth, the ability to think and to question. Wundt gave him precision, method and scientific rigor. And from this combination, something new would emerge, Russian scientific psychology. After returning from Germany, Chelpanov moves to Kiev, where he begins teaching at St. Vladimir University. It is during this period that the breadth of Chelpanov's intellectual interests becomes fully visible. He publishes dozens of articles and critical reviews, writes textbooks on philosophy and logic, and most importantly on psychology, which would go on to be reissued 16 times. Active work during those years culminated in the brilliant defense of his doctoral dissertation. He also publishes the book Brain and Soul, a work that was later recognized as one of the most significant critiques of metaphysical materialism, not only in Russian, but in world literature. But gradually, Chelpanov starts doing what he had long envisioned, to establish psychology as an independent discipline. He organizes a psychological seminar attracting young and talented students. Among them are his future disciples, Pavel Blonsky and Gustav Speth. At this time, Chelpanov was full of hope and inspiration. But in 1906, he was struck by a devastating personal tragedy. His wife, Olga Epifanovna, died unexpectedly, leaving him with 3 children: Alexander, aged 11, Natalia, aged 8, and Tatiana, aged 5. A year later, Chelpanov receives an invitation to Moscow. He is offered the position of the head of the philosophy department at Moscow University. Just a few years earlier, this very department had been led by his teacher, Nikolai Grot, who had died prematurely at the age of only 46. Chelpanov had remained in close contact with him until the very end, and his loss left a profound mark on him. Chelpanov's farewell to Kiev became a truly memorable event. Students who had hoped until the very last moment to keep him organized a ceremonial send-off. It felt as though the entire city had come to bid farewell to a man who had given so much to science and to them. And with this, a new chapter begins. A chapter that will last over 3 decades. A period that will ultimately reshape the course of Russian psychology. In Moscow, the scale of Chelpanov's influence and opportunities changes dramatically. During this period, he gradually emerges as one of the central figures of Moscow's intellectual life. His home becomes a gathering place for representatives of the scientific intelligentsia, bringing together philosophers and writers such as Alexei Losev and Nikolai Berdyaev. He is actively involved in the work of the Moscow Psychological Society, serving as vice chairman under Lev Lopatin. Together, they published the journal Problems of Philosophy and Psychology, one of the key intellectual platforms of the time. At the same time, he continues to lecture extensively, attracting students from across the country. His seminars are overflowing. Students sit on the floor and line the walls just to listen. Psychology in that moment feels modern, alive, and full of promise. And yet, despite all this, lectures, publications, and growing authority, Chelpanov increasingly realizes that this is not enough. Psychology still has no independent place of its own. It remains confined within philosophy, lacking its own institutional foundation, its own methods, and its own space. And so, a new idea begins to take shape. An idea which sounds almost daring for its time, to build a full-fledged psychological institute in Russia. Yet, an idea is never enough. It requires resources, serious resources. And this is where a figure appears without whom this project might have remained only a vision. Sergey Shchukin. Shchukin is not just a wealthy industrialist. He is one of the most perceptive collectors of his time, the very man who acquires works by Pablo Picasso when many still fail to recognize his genius. Shchukin possesses a rare ability to see the future before others do. And when he meets Chelpanov, he recognizes in him not simply a scholar, but a figure capable of reshaping an entire scientific field. Shchukin agrees to finance the institute, but on two conditions. First, that the project is led by Chelpanov himself. Second, that the institute bear the name of his wife, Lydia Shchukina. According to one account, Lydia was personally acquainted with Chelpanov and admired his work before her tragic and untimely death. Thus emerges a rare alliance between science and patronage, between vision and means. To bring this vision into reality, they invite one of the leading architects of the time, Roman Klein, the very same Klein who designed the future Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts. The institute is built in the very heart of Moscow, just minutes away from the Moscow Kremlin. The construction was carried out according to a specially designed project and was completed in just 2 years. The institute became the largest of its kind in the world, with 3 floors and around 60 laboratories, equipped with all kinds of instruments designed to measure attention, memory, and reaction time with unprecedented precision. As Edward Titchener wrote in a letter, the equipment and facilities rival, if not surpass, those of any laboratory in the world. For the first time in Russia, psychology becomes not merely a philosophical discourse, but a true experimental science. The opening day feels less like a ceremony and more like a turning point in history. Carriages arrive, voices fill the entrance, professors and students gather. Chelpanov steps forward. Messages of congratulations are read aloud. From Germany, from Wilhelm Wundt, from America, from Edward Titchener, from Europe, from scholars such as Hermann Ebbinghaus and Oswald Kulpe. At that moment, it becomes clear this is international recognition. Over roughly the next decade, the Psychological Institute grows into something far greater than just a single institution. It becomes the center around which Russian scientific psychology begins to take shape. Young scholars gather here, many of whom will later define the direction of the discipline. Among them are Pavel Blonsky, Gustav Speth, whom Chelpanov had known from his Kiev period, Nadezhda Ladygina-Kotz, Russia's first woman psychologist, Konstantin Kornilov, Sergey Rubinstein, and others. The institute is alive with intellectual energy. Lectures, seminars, laboratory work, debates that continue late into the night. And at the center of it all stands Georgy Ivanovich Chelpanov, not merely a lecturer, but an organizer of science. Like his mentor Nikolai Grot, he also shows a particular warmth towards his students and personally participates in their life. One episode illustrates this particularly vividly. When Blonsky once decided not to defend his diploma and not to pursue an academic career, he wrote to Chelpanov about it. Imagine his surprise when the very next day he saw, through the small window of his semi-basement room, Chelpanov himself walking toward his modest lodging. Having received the letter, Chelpanov felt it necessary to intervene personally, to dissuade his student from his impulsive decision, help him pass the exam, and obtain his diploma. Blonsky was so embarrassed that he ran to his landlord, a shoemaker who was always drunk, and begged him not to let Chelpanov in. After a while, he himself went to Chelpanov and had a long conversation with him. After that, he changed his decision and successfully passed the exams. At that time, Chelpanov's authority was huge, and it seemed that his work was on the path to even greater success. But then, history intervened. The Russian Revolution of 1917 doesn't simply change political power. It shakes society to its very foundations. Institutions are reorganized, priorities are redefined, and science itself must now align with Marxist philosophy. Psychology, too, is drawn into this transformation. What had been built as an experimental and theoretically grounded discipline begins to be criticized as abstract, detached, and insufficiently aligned with the new social reality. And in this new world, Chelpanov's fate takes a tragic turn. In 1923, Georgy Ivanovich is expelled from the psychological institute he himself created. What makes this moment especially painful is not only the decision, but who stands behind it. The initiators of his removal are his own former students and colleagues, Konstantin Kornilov, Pavel Blonsky, and others, who now argue that psychology must be rebuilt on a Marxist foundation, and that Chelpanov's views are outdated. He is banned from giving public lectures. He is no longer allowed to publish his works. And very quickly, he is left without any means of livelihood. In a letter to his daughter, he writes that he had finally been granted permission to give a lecture, but was unable to deliver it because he didn't even have a decent suit to wear. It is precisely during that period that the scene we began with unfolds. Having been left completely without work, he would come to the psychological institute he had founded and sit near the entrance. He would ask the staff whether they still remembered him, but people would pass by quickly, pretending not to recognize him. Of all his Moscow students, only Gustav Spät would occasionally come and try to help, until his own arrest in 1935. The final years of Chelpanov's life unfold as a series of devastating losses. In 1934, his daughter dies unexpectedly. His second daughter moves to France a year later, and they will never see each other again. Then another blow follows. In 1935, his son Alexander is arrested. That winter, his granddaughter Marina dies. The girl never manages to come to terms with her father's absence. It is said that she would wait for him by the door every evening. In his final years, Chelpanov is gravely ill. Both his son Alexander and Gustav Spät, who was like a second son to him, were executed as part of a fabricated political case. But Chelpanov is never told about their fate. He dies in February 1936, in poverty, in isolation, almost forgotten. His grave is lost, and his name is almost erased from history. It will take decades before he is rediscovered, his works are republished, and before his role is acknowledged again. And yet, even today, almost none of his legacy has been translated into English. But without this man, the face of the Russian psychology would have been very different. If you want to hear more of these stories, subscribe to my channel.